Hey, good evening. Welcome, everyone. I'm Randy Griffey, head curator here at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and it's my intense, deep pleasure to welcome you here tonight for tonight's talk as part of the museum's Clarice Smith Distinguished Lecture Series. And Director Stephanie Stebish sends her welcome and well wishes from Chattanooga. Before we begin, we also want to gratefully acknowledge the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here, the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we are gathered, and the labor of people who were enslaved in constructing this historic building. The Smithsonian American Art Museum established the Clarice Smith Distinguished Lectures in American Art in 2004 to present new insights in American art from the perspectives of outstanding artists, critics, and scholars. This annual series takes place each fall and is made possible by the generosity of Clarice Smith, about whom I'll have a few more words in a moment. I'd like to invite those of you who are here in person to join us for a reception in Kogod Courtyard after the program. And for those joining us online and who are subscribed to our YouTube channel, please use the comment section to ask questions at the end of the program. For those in person, please use the comment card inside your program, and those will be collected at the end of the lecture. I invite you to join me in a moment of silence to remember Clarice Smith, patron of the Clarice Smith Distinguished Lecture in American Art. A member of the Smithsonian American Art Museum's commission since 2003, Clarice passed away last December. Clarice was a nationally recognized artist, educator, and philanthropist who was a generous benefactor of the arts, culture, health, and education organizations across the country. In 2004, Clarice's generous support launched this popular series, which brings a leading artist, critic, or scholar to SAAM each fall to share their unique perspectives on American art and culture with the public. We are delighted to present this evening's program to a sold-out audience, not all of whom arrived or have arrived yet. I'm sure they're all coming. It's a beautiful night out, with hundreds more tuning in online from around the country. Let's begin the program with a brief moment of silence, please. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our distinguished guest. Roberto Lugo is a Philadelphia-based artist, ceramicist, social activist, poet, and educator. Lugo utilizes classical poetry forms in conjunction with portraiture and surface design reminiscent of his North Philadelphia upbringing and hip-hop culture to highlight themes of poverty, inequality, and racial injustice. Lugo's works reimagine traditional European and Asian ceramics, adding a 21st century street sensibility. Their hand-painted surfaces feature classic decorative patterns and motifs, combined with elements of urban life, graffiti, and portraits of individuals who have been historically absent from traditional luxury vessels, including individuals such as Sojourner Truth, Dr. Cornel West, and the notorious Biggie, as well as Lugo's family members, and very often himself. Lugo holds a BFA from the Kansas City Art Institute and an MFA from Penn State. His work has been featured in exhibitions at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, and the Museum of Arts and Design in New York, among others. He's a recipient of numerous awards, including a 2019 Pew Fellowship, a Cynthia Hazen-Polsky and Leon Polsky Rome Prize, and a U.S. Artist Award. His work is found in the permanent collections of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the High Museum, and the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, Brooklyn Museum, and Walters Art Museum, and more, including, not least of all, the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So he is currently assistant professor at Tyler School of Art and Design in Philadelphia. And his work is featured in the Renwick Gallery's current and spectacular exhibition, This Present Moment, Crafting a Better World, which I hope you will see and enjoy. Tonight, he will detail his studio practice and the intersections of identity, representation, empowerment, and storytelling in his work, from Sévres porcelain-inspired vessels depicting Harriet Tubman to life-size urns decorated with likenesses of Biggie Smalls and Tupac. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Starting off good. So while we wait on getting the screen up and running and everything, today's my son's birthday, my 4-year-old son. So maybe one day he'll hear this talk and he'll hear me say happy birthday to him. So great, thank you. Give a hand to the folks who helped me. You ever have a pain in your heart that no drug could fix? It leaks down to your stomach and makes you sick. You could try everything you can, but there ain't no fix to get rid of it. Well, hear my words and stand tall like a New York Knick. I know you're dealing with nitwits, been smoking your cigarettes and chewing your nickerettes and filling your stomach with liquid as strong as liquor gets. But listen up, those who fall are destined to ball, because in spite of it all, you're the first people call when they're pressed to the wall from dealing with y'all. Don't get mad when this world don't think you're a 10, because in the end, those who've seen this world's ugly are dimes in the end. This video is called Ghetto is Resourceful, and it's a video of me making a pottery wheel out of a tire axle and a tree stump. One of the reasons I felt like it was necessary to define or talk about the word ghetto is because that's the word that people predominantly use to describe where it is that I'm from. I'm from the Kensington neighborhood in Philly, which is also known as the Badlands, but for us familiar, we just called it the ghetto. And ghetto is used a lot of times to describe something in a diminutive way. But for me, ghetto is a form of resourcefulness. I think often when we think of people rigging things like making a planter out of a tire, you know, if you're a white person in more of a suburban neighborhood, that might be DIY. But if you're from the hood, it's called ghetto. And I come from a line of ghetto people, of creative people, of people who make a lot of stuff with very little. In these streets, I never had an art class. My first art class happened at the age of 25 years old when I took my first college course. But growing up, in hindsight, I really had the Philadelphia murals. The mural program in Philadelphia is really incredible. And I also grew up doing graffiti. And graffiti was more of a construct of me trying to fit in with my cousins and also having the comfort of having these people around me to keep me protected. But I want to talk to you a little bit today about how those two influences eventually got me to the point where I'm creating my own murals in Philadelphia with the Mural Arts program, and how graffiti intersects with the pottery that I make and how I see those relationships. This is a project that I did with Houseplant, which is a company owned by Seth Rogen, so I was able to work with him and Houseplant directly to create these one-of-a-kind objects. I want to talk to you a little bit about what happens when you create opportunities for people who come from communities like where I come from to be able to do things like choose to have a career in pottery. I had this question come up before this lecture, and we talked a little bit about the influence of Dave the Potter on my work. And one of the things that was said was that Dave the Potter was also a poet. And I'd like to think that in every community, regardless of background, that there are creative people, that there are artists. One of the things that happens, though, is that a lot of times those artists never get to become artists because they never get the opportunity to be able to have access to the arts, to express themselves. So where do those people turn? What do they do with their lives? As an educator, I think about that because of the fact that How do I create opportunities for people that come from the place where I do to take pottery classes? How did I get myself from there to here? Well, my story is very unconventional. I moved away from Philadelphia because I saw my life going in the wrong direction, and I just wanted to take a class and be around people my age, so I decided to take a community college course. But most people never get to that place. So what are the obstacles and things that we have in the way of people being able to get access to art? So I thought to myself, why not set up a pottery wheel in the street so that you don't have to sign up for a class, so that you don't have to go somewhere and figure it out, so you don't have to even develop the interest? How do we develop the interest in the community?
Raised here in Kensington, a neighborhood with a national reputation for drugs, poverty, and crime. Not pottery.
So whenever you push that, you see what I'm saying? More forward. They see this potter's wheel, they stop, and I get to teach them and put my hands on their hands. Open that up, perfect. And the thing that's really amazing is to see the look in their eyes. Dope, right? The emotion that I gather. When you give someone like me an opportunity, you know, someone that comes from a family that works so hard, we just really put ourselves into it. When a lot of people come from schools like mine, they pursue trades or jobs just like blue-collar work, which is fine if that's like really what they want, but I think a lot of times they don't really feel like they got another option. And just that vision of somebody that looks like them making pottery, I think is a huge impact. Studios are moving here, you know, they're moving to Kensington. They'll see that building and say ceramics and they'll think, oh, that's for other people, you know, to take classes there, but really it's for them. By being here and showing them that people that look like them are doing it, maybe they'll just take a class. Good job.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
Yes.
Every time I do this, I get a different experience. And, you know, through this process, I taught people that I just saw dealing drugs. I taught sex workers. I taught, you know, I taught seniors. I taught children. Just communities of people. Sometimes people watch. Sometimes they sit down and they want to learn how to throw pot on the wheel. Through my experience in going to college for ceramics, I didn't really see my background as one where I faced a lot of racism, even though, looking back, there were severe forms of racism, like almost being beat to death for wanting to play baseball with a group of other children. And in college, I came to this realization that regardless of what I tried to do, I would always be seen for how I look on the outside. And this one critique that my wife had in a photography class, someone referred to me as a Mexican gangster, and the entire class had a good laugh at it. And I was really upset about that because the photo didn't have anything that referenced my heritage. I'm Puerto Rican. You know, it was this confrontation that I had with myself where I realized that, you know, even though I was trying to go to school to learn how to make production pottery, people didn't see me that way. It was kind of like I was a novelty. So I was walking through the library at the school that I went to, the Kansas City Art Institute, and I saw this book. In the front of the book, one of the things that I saw was this teapot, and for me, it just looked expensive. And I said to myself, what if I took that teapot and then put my face on it? What if I put my face in a place that didn't belong? My work is a lot about my experience, my lived experience, and how it's fraught with these things that I didn't realize were forms of oppression. This particular piece is called Oppression, and it's something that I made in graduate school. And I made it because my brother got incarcerated for an act that most people do on a weekly basis. If not, everybody in this room has probably done it at some point. And I thought to myself about how unfair that it was, how they saw him just as this young brown man with no potential and no hope, and how he has so much to offer the world, and how someone who slept in the same bed as him, someone who grew up and had all the same meals as him, winded up going to graduate school for pottery, and how he was incarcerated for 5 years. At the time he was incarcerated, he was in solitary confinement. And he explained to me the story that when he first got there, they found a razor blade in his locker, and it was there from the previous person that had that locker. But no one believed him. And I thought to myself about how he and I shared these experiences growing up, but how I could possibly go to school for something that I was passionate about while he was in this place. And for my first critique, I decided to sculpt this portrait of myself, and then I realized that it looked a lot like my brother. So I sculpted two of them, and I turned them into these saucers to capture the leftovers from drinking tea. And during that experience, I thought a little bit about growing up in Philly and how in school we used to drum on the lunch tables and we used to recite our rap lyrics. And I thought to myself that I would write a poem about this experience with my brother. My brother's locked in a state pen. Me, I make art at Penn State. You see, I'm a potter, I make plates. Him, he's in jail, he make plates. You see, I tried to be a student. Shit, I got home, I opened my cupboards, and all I saw was stew. Then I turned around, I got smacked, and all I did was stew. Then I thought I'd join a synagogue. But when it came to church, I just saw its walls cracked by its cinder blocks, and words went over my head like a cinder shot. Being fat leaves this world disappointed like a sinner's pop. I thought I could be a veteran. But when it came to war, I just saw my Pearl Jam like that veteran band, man. Gunshots keep me up late nights like Letterman. I can't be no Christian. I get confused who to thank for these pots that I'm pissing in. So listen in. Now not only do I have a pot to piss in, but I can make it myself. See, when I make pottery, I think about its archival quality and how it's been used historically. Pottery tells us about all these cultures, from ancient Greece to ancient China, what was going on, what people were eating and drinking, what the culture was like. And I thought about the fact that the culture that I grew up in, that these lives that are treated like the way my brothers are, the lives that are often taken away, are in the news one day and then they're out the next. And how I could use the medium that I work in, this medium that lasts for thousands of years, to be able to keep someone's story going that's no longer here with us. I think about the violence that I grew up with and how it's commemorated and communicated through hip hop. And I thought about how lives are lost through that process, like the lives of the Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac. The piece on the right-hand side is a piece made with an actual gun barrel from a gun buyback program that I reconfigured to be able to be a spout for a teapot. This particular piece I included because I think it brings in a lot of the different elements that I try to include in my pottery, which is thinking a lot about these historical forms of decoration and ornamentation, and including the graffiti that I grew up doing, including all the different textiles that make up my blood, where I'm from, where my ancestors are from, and bringing all those things together to show you how combined those things can be beautiful next to one another. I also look a lot at history and historical works. This particular piece is the centennial vase or the century vase that's on the right-hand side, and it was made for the 1876 World's Fair in Philadelphia. And this pot is a really sort of a piece of propaganda communicating a colonist form of communicating what was happening in the first 100 years of the United States. And so I use that to be able to create a framework to be able to make my own work to talk about centuries or blocks of time. The piece on the left is called A Century of Brooklyn, and it's in the Brooklyn Museum. Right now I'm in an exhibition. It's called Before Yesterday We Could Fly, which is an Afrofuturistic period room at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And when I was asked to be a part of this exhibition, it really touched me in a way that I don't think I ever felt as an artist. And I felt like I was being included in a community and culture that I felt myself being a part of, but I needed this validation. I needed this validation to acknowledge my ancestry and where I'm from and how I try to communicate and represent that in my work. My work is all about representation. And representation is so important to me because it's instinctual. I love the exhibition that you have here of artists that are unschooled. I'm not sure exactly what the right term is, but people that didn't go to school for visual art. And one of the reasons why is because there's this really great article by an art educator named Olivia Gude, and she wrote an essay called Postmodern Principles. And in Postmodern Principles, she looks at all the work that her students were making to talk a little bit about how to communicate what is postmodernism. Because I don't know if anybody's tried to describe it to you, but I still don't know what it is. But if you give students paper and you give them a prompt and you have them make work and you decide to sort it, what does that look like? It looks like the different elements that she came up with were things like juxtaposition, appropriation, and one of them was the idea of representing. My work is all about that because I find the more and more that I'm involved in pottery, not just makers are not people of color, I don't see enough of them, but also the people that are represented in these stories, these narratives. And I want to be able to communicate how different people have contributed, whether they're hip-hop artists, whether they're jazz musicians, whether they're civil rights activists, whether they're astronauts. This piece is called The Scarab Vase on the left, and it's made by one of my favorite artists, Adelaide Alsop Robino, and this vase took 1,000 hours to carve. And it's also known as the Scarab Vase, and so I decided to make my own version of this, and it's called the Roach Vase. The piece on the left is originally the Jazz Bowl, which was made by artist Victor Schreckengoss, which is one of my favorite iconic pieces of pottery. So I decided to make a piece called the Hip Hop Vase. And you know, the jazz bowl at the time that it was made, the jazz bowl at the time it was made was really revolutionary because jazz was new. And so jazz, in the way that it was seen at that point, is the way that people see hip hop now. These are bowls that I made that are referencing sneakers. I'm constantly thinking about what are the patterns, what are the elements that make up visually the culture that I grew up in. I'm trying to represent where I'm from, but I don't want to just do it in these ways that people are accustomed to seeing. So, you know, one of the elements that I noticed that are really like the thing that I feel like people miss so often is that people of color, black and brown people, make up culture so often and are not given credit for the culture that they created. The sneakers, the reason why they're popular is because black and brown people made them popular. The reason why they're stylish is because black and brown people made them stylish. I think about not only these iconic elements, but also the iconic figures. Like, one of the things that I feel like is a real miseducation for me was I grew up doing graffiti throughout my teenage years. And you know how I would sign it? I would sign it at the end with a crown. And when I was in undergraduate school, I had made a piece, and I finally started to embrace where I was from. I was afraid of representing where I was from, and I signed my name with a crown. And somebody said, "Why are you copying Basquiat?" And I said, "Who's Basquiat?" I was 29 years old, and I've been referencing Basquiat my entire adolescence up to my adulthood, and I had no idea who that was. A Haitian and Puerto Rican. Thinking about these sneakers, I really want to be able to figure out a connection, how to connect with the community, not just represent, but connect with them in a way that makes sense. So growing up, we idolized and had these sneakers, and they were really the epitome of status in the community, what we call stunting. So this series is called Stunting, and it's these sneakers that I developed by hand painting canvas. And I have a company that I work with called Garrickson in Philly that cuts up my canvas and hand sews these sneakers together. These particular sneakers have ceramic elements to them, the tongue and the aglet that's on there. Here's a video of them. Yeah, I wore them. So when I was trying to, you know, every project you have as an artist, you got to push so hard for things to work. So imagine being a ceramic potter and trying to sell sneakers. And these sneakers were not cheap. These sneakers were $3,500 to be able to get them out. And so I had a couple people that are celebrities that I was working with, and I showed one of them the sneakers, and he said, "I don't know, my daughter doesn't really like them." And then I went to an event where this person was out there like, where'd you get them sneakers at? It's like, you missed your chance. You could have had them. So the Before Yesterday We Could Fly exhibition, for me, is it was really a revolutionary moment in my life because my family had never been to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was really the second time I had ever visited the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And here I was, not only having artwork in the exhibition, but being able to represent the culture that, you know, like if you look at this vase, you know, it has graffiti in the bottom of it, and it has, for me, the most iconic figure throughout history, the person that I really look at for who I want to be as a human being, Harriet Tubman. And this piece was featured on the exterior of the Met. And so there was this moment where I was walking with my parents into the museum, and I said, Mom, do you see that banner? And she looked over and she saw this thing, and she began to get emotional. This is the interior of the room. Now, I'm not gonna gloat too much, but I am the artist who has the most work in the exhibition. Sometimes if you can't be the best, you just have to have the most, right? But this is the crazy thing, though, for me about this exhibition is made up of all the people that inspired me to be an artist to begin with. This is an exhibition that's at the Renwick Museum. Sorry. And this happens all the time as an artist, where you go to an exhibition and you just, I think it's partly the trauma of growing up where I did, where you don't see your self-worth. You don't think you're worth anything, even if you have all the awards, all the accolades, if you're in all the museums, you still have that imposter syndrome. And I separate myself. Like, I see Roberto Lugo as a different person, but that person makes really important work. And so it's worth for me to keep going. My wife and I have a running bet on how long into my lecture is going to take for me to cry. So if anybody can get that time, I can get it to her. See who won the poll. Oh, man. This is at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is a Greek pot. So I want to ask y'all a question. How many people in this room have ever gotten a fruit salad that had way too much cantaloupe in it? Be honest. You can say you can substitute melon. Sometimes it has too much melon in it, right? There's a lot of cantaloupe-ass fruit salads in this world, okay? And I came to this realization because a few years ago I was doing an artist residency, and I would buy a fruit salad for my assistant, and we would share it, and it had this kiwi on top. And I remember we used to take turns being the person that took the kiwi, right? And then it was also what fruit the kiwi touched, because the acidity from the kiwi leaked into the fruit around it. And those were that much more delicious, right? And I think about that because that's how I feel like I inherited the art world. I felt like there was so much of one thing that was great on its own, necessary, great artwork, but there wasn't enough of us. And so we became this element that people are attracted to for the wrong reasons, right? When in reality, we're just part of the rest of it. We need to be acknowledged for who we are, what we contribute. But I think diversity is really interesting in how it's being talked about today, and how when I came into visual art, and I would have situations where somebody would just like straight up call me a name, a racist name, and I would go to the school and complain about it, and they'd be like, well, you know, it's an art critique, so people are supposed to be able to say what they want, you know? Yeah. And the difference between that now and what artists, curators, civil rights activists, people in the community, Black Lives Matter, all these people have done to be able to complicate that narrative and challenge these things so that people, nowadays, if you go to school and you call somebody Mexican gangster, you got a problem on your hands, you know? And we're not talking about that long ago. So for me, one of the things that I realized is the work that I'm doing now might be important, but the reality is that a lot of the things that I'm doing, I'm not gonna see in my lifetime. And that's a fight that a lot of people have to make. That you have to be able to take on burdens, and you have to be able to take on those things and struggle with them, knowing that you might not see the benefits of them. Like, I can't go back to school now to see the benefits of the things that people like me have done in the community. So in my work, one of the things that I'm really trying to do is navigate this relationship with where I'm from, where I'm at, and how to continue to engage with the community that I grew up in. So I created this brand called Village Potter, which is where I make handmade cups and objects that people can have in their home. These are septa-trained butter dishes. These are bookends. That one guy sitting on a stack of money. These are my kids wearing the clothes. That's Otto. That's Otto on the right, the left-hand side. He's the one that turned 4, and that's my other son Theo, who turned 8 years old just a month ago. But they're wearing Daddy's clothes, so, and it's great because I didn't have to pay them. These are some of my cups. So these are espresso mugs on the left-hand side, and this is a handmade coffee mug on the right-hand side with my favorite artist. I don't know if you can guess who he is. This is an exhibition that I had in Philadelphia that I feel like is really important to talk about, which is called a God Complex, A Different Philadelphia. And this exhibition came about because I was actually asked in this exhibition to help work with the curators to put together an exhibition of the work that they had in their collection. And one of the things that I witnessed when I went through the collection was over 5,000 objects that predominantly, I don't know exactly what the percentage, but if I had to guess, you know, over 80% of the collection is paintings of white men, painted by white men. So I didn't exactly know how I would curate that into something that I would want to go to. I like history, and I like being in historical places. I don't like to imagine what it would have been like for me to be the person that I am today in those places, but I like them as objects in history nonetheless. And so I decided to create this exhibition where I actually made my own work and painted half the gallery space like the Philly that I grew up in, and had portraits of people that had got me to the place where I'm at today. And then on the other side of it were these historical paintings like that of George Washington, of Ben Franklin, Abraham Lincoln. And so the piece in the middle that has Ben Franklin on it has my father on the other side. And we didn't plan this, but this particular piece is really, it's really a piece about when I was little, my father would ride his bike from Philadelphia to New Jersey just to start his work every day. He would ride his bike for an hour to Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And so the piece has all these cutouts of the bridge itself, but the bridge was the Ben Franklin Bridge. So it's really interesting how things come full circle. And then I have this exhibition with an actual painting of Ben Franklin and my father on the other side. The last year, after COVID hit, one of the things that happened was I was one of the first ceramic potter to win the Rome Prize, which is a really big deal for me and for the community. Thank you. And 2 weeks in, Italy became the epicenter of COVID. And so this residency, I moved my whole family. I actually sold my house because I was like, I got 6 months to buy another house and I'm gonna get away from these taxes. So we lived in 7 different Airbnbs for a year after, and I only got 2 weeks of the residency, and I spent like all my money trying to get over there. And I got back and I was kind of lost trying to think of a project to work on. And I've always wanted to work in a monolithic scale, and I got an opportunity for Grounds for Sculpture to work on a large-scale piece. And I thought of this poem by KRS-One and Dougie Fresh where he says, visualize wealth and put yourself in the picture. And I thought about how in contemporary art, especially at art fairs, people love to take pictures of themselves with artwork, and it's sort of seen in bad taste to do that. But I always see it as like people are trying to see themselves reflected in art. And so it's literally like a literal way of people trying to do that. Regardless of where you come from, you want to be a part of it. And so I thought, why don't I make a piece where people can literally put themselves in it, and it's designed for them to take a picture of themselves inside of the artwork. This piece is 20 foot tall. Yeah, it is awesome, isn't it? Thank you. So I love and I hate social media. I think social media is a cause for a lot of my depression, but I think it also creates access for a lot of people to be able to see my artwork and not have to just go to a museum to be able to see it, but be able to connect with it from their home. This particular piece is called Prison Sequence, and it's of a Greek vase. I want to do that again. Okay. And so here's the piece in photography form. I like looking at these relationships because for me it's so interesting how we can understand things like one of my favorite lecturers in ceramics is Pete Pinnell, and he once gave a talk on drinking vessels and ceramics, and one of the things that he shared was that in ancient Greece you would lay down and eat, and so the example he gave is if you're ever like laying down in your house and watching Netflix and eating, you can just say, I'm doing it like the Greeks used to do it, which I think is a good idea. I'm going to skip this one. So recently, through all the projects and opportunities that I got, I was able to connect with Mural Arts in Philadelphia, which is actually an organization that I grew up seeing every single day in the streets, and it's predominantly why I do portraiture. Most of the murals that I grew up were portraits of people of color in Philadelphia. And they asked me if I would work on a mural, and my immediate response was, I want to work on a mural of Black Thought. And if you don't know who Black Thought is, shame on you. But he's the lead singer from The Roots, and he's on the Jimmy Fallon show every night. But he's an idol of mine and somebody whose work I admire at the highest level. And this is how life works. Black Thought happened to be on the board of directors for Mural Arts, and has gone to a lot of their events, and he agreed to let me do this mural. So I got to meet him a bunch of times and talk with him and even text him, send him pictures of what I was working on. I'm not gonna lie to you, it was very humbling because, not only because I'm getting to work with this person, but because it's an opportunity to work with another artist and them to be real with you and say, I don't like that, I don't like this, I like that, you should work on this. And we were able to come up with something that I think is really special. So, one of the things is with the work that I'm making, I think it's important to acknowledge all the people that have created the opportunities for me to have what I do. All the faces that I paint are people who have significantly contributed to my life. And as an artist, the legacy that I want to leave, I want to think a little bit about the reality of being an artist and how I can communicate that to others and how I can share the things that I've struggled with to be able to enrich and improve their lives. So lastly, I'm going to leave you with a poem that I wrote called 10 Things That I've Learned Since Being an Artist. 10, watch how you make your ends. You see cash could buy Benz, but it can't buy friends. And 9, Keep your ambition in line, because if you're always looking forward, you can't buy back time. And 8, you might have to see some hate. A lot of shit that you make, nobody relates. And 7, watch out for dudes named Kevin. You see, people come in different names and offer you big fame, but if you trust in the wrong people, that brings you big pain. And 6, man, you might have to take some licks, but there's a limit to that, son. Don't take no shit. And 5, nobody's more important than your wife. Ignoring loved ones brings you big strife. And 4, look, this rule you can't ignore. Believe in yourself, man. Of this I'm sure. And 3, look, this rule has got to be key. Being bitter is expensive. Being kind is free. And 2, look, just forget everything you knew, because all you know it alls, you learn nothing new. You see, people going to try to rank you. Believe this, my friend, it doesn't matter how long it takes for you to get to the end. You just keep scoring a 1. Eventually, the world will see you're a 10. The end. I want to sincerely thank everybody for coming out tonight. And, you know, one of my favorite comedians, I don't know if anybody here ever heard of John Mulaney? Shout out to John Mulaney. But one of my favorite things that he says is, it's just amazing that you would show up for anything, because, like, I think the quote is like canceling plans is like a drug. So, you know, the fact that y'all decided to show up against all odds is just really amazing to me. So I sincerely appreciate that. I think we have some questions. We're going to take some questions not only from the audience, but from people online. Is that right? We ready for questions? Okay. Take a second here. You got a question? Okay, we got a hand up here. I'm just going to go ahead and take the question. Go ahead.
I'm speechless. I don't have words, but I'm really inspired by your book. I want to say that. The second, and I love pottery, by the way. I love clay. So I'm just seeing what you're doing with clay. But I have 2 questions, and they're very basic. One is that big vase that you showed. Mm-hmm. I said to my husband, it can't possibly be clay. So that's my question to you. If it is, how did you do it?
Okay.
That's one question. The second question is, the coin I would love to have. Is there a way to get the coin? Because that is something that one can wake up to and be inspired every day.
Well, thank you very much, because I'm very, I hesitate a lot of times to do poetry in a lot of my presentations. Sometimes I feel like it can be seen as a gimmick, you know, but then sometimes you just got to be like, nah, that's me. That's what I have to offer. And I think for me, one of the reasons why I have that feeling is because society's kind of designed me to feel that way, to feel like anything special that comes from the culture and community that I have and that I was built on is like a negative, or it's like a trope, or it shouldn't be done. And when you have enough of that happen, then what winds up happening is you don't wind up having all the skills that you were taught, that you actually inherited. And so I love that. I don't have, eventually I would love to, have a book of my poetry. I think that'd be really awesome. I am going to work on a children's book, though, which I'm really excited about. So I don't know what it's going to be about. Probably a little potter named Roberto. We'll see. And your other question, it is not made out of clay. The piece is made out of steel, foam, and resin. And it took over 3 months to make with a place called the Seward Johnson Atelier in New Jersey. Shout out to those folks, because this is like a piece that has several stories, and I had to get up on electronic scaffolding to paint it, and I'm afraid of heights. And so they were able to help me through that, which was emotionally a lot.
Thank you. If any other folks have questions, we ask that you write them on the comment card for us so we can ask them via the mic so those watching online can also hear the question clearly. And if those of you online are watching, please drop your questions in the chat box.
Do we have any questions yet?
No, not from online.
We got a hand over there. We got a card. We got a card, everybody.
This person was paying attention. Could you please talk about the 215 references in your work?
Well, 215 is the area code for Philly, so that's what that's about. But if you commission me, I'll do your area code too.
I always like to hear how everyone says their own area code. 215, good to know. What does your brainstorming process look like? As an art teacher, I'd love to share your process with my students as they learn to create.
That's an amazing question. So one of the things I feel like was really great about art is I think art adapts to all of our individual practices, needs, and interests. So one of the things I often tell my students is if it feels like work, don't do it anymore. Because once you leave school, it's going to be so hard to continue making art that if you have to do work on top of work, you're not going to want to do it anymore. So follow your bliss. So for me, a lot of my practice is really instinctual. It's like I usually don't do any drawing before I'm going to make something because I like drawing, but I don't like drawing what I'm about to make. I think clay has a tendency to like put me in my place. And so a lot of times when I'm making something, it kind of tells me what I need to make in terms of the form. And then in terms of decoration, I have a overall premise, an idea of what's really important to me. And so, you know, one of these ideas is representing. And when I think about that, that comes in a lot of different formats. And so I suggest that you give yourself a few prompts. You give yourself a few questions to answer, things that are important to you. You don't have to share that with anybody else. But if you start off with that, then it helps you guide, you know, your next move. And I only work one step at a time, which is pretty slow.
It's excellent advice. This one is from online. How does your art practice inform what you do as an educator?
Yeah, well, as an educator, I learned a lot through the school, through the education system about what I don't want to do as a professor. So, like for example, I got a few of my students here in one of our first classes. What did we do? We went to go visit an artist studio, and then we had Mexican food, and that was class, and they all loved that class. But then we have studio visits and critiques, and I invest in them as human beings. And I have an interest in who they are and what it is that they want to do with their life. And my advice to them is on that basis. I'm thinking about the holistic person and not just about the objects that I'm seeing in front of them. I think they have enough of that. I think every educator contributes something. But for me, I really think that as an educator, I contribute a lot of practicality. You know, thinking about, okay, you like to do this thing, you know, how does this, man, I hate to say it this way, but like, you know, like for some reason or another, a lot of people wind up getting naked in college for art, you know, and it's like, okay, well, that's really important to you. You know, how are you going to keep making this work afterwards? Like, how are you going to take this to the next place where, you know, people can support it, you know, and then you can make more videos or you can produce and contribute to your art. So I'm asking them a lot about things like, who's your audience, which if somebody tells me I make art for myself one more time, we make art for ourselves, that's true, but like you're also asking me to look at it, right? And so your artwork's going to affect people and it's going to affect communities. And so if you're not thinking about that, you're not really contributing a lot. At least that's my opinion.
Thank you. I like this one. I don't know if the person intended the pun, but I'm going to lean into it. What was the turning point in your career, and what tools did you or do you use to balance it all?
Man, there's a lot of points that I think were turning points in my career. One of them was when I shared that poem that I did with you with my brother being incarcerated. That was when I was in graduate school. And right afterwards, I shared this poem, and I was really emotional, and someone told me that I should never speak again. That was their critique, and it was really difficult for me to hear. And then there's so many things I hear. As a professor, my first year, I really struggled with writing. And my first year review, someone told me that I write like I didn't graduate from high school. So it still happens a lot. What was the question again?
What was the turning point, which you answered, and then what tools do you use to balance it all?
Yeah, I think the turning point was definitely when, so part of the exhibition with the Met was, it was curated by Hannah Beekler, which was the set designer for Black Panther, and meeting her, somebody who was just like, next level artist, you know, and to be recognized by this person and have the opportunity to be able to interact with these artists who I grew inspired by and who I've actually had an influential role in who I even am as an artist was really big. I think it's really easy for me to balance who I am because I'll be honest with you, I'm a very insecure person. And that insecurity balances out all the success. And it's an odd thing where, you know, your mental health can actually sometimes become an asset because I'll never be big-headed because I'm my biggest critic. But I think that's part of it. And I do extensively work on my mental health, but at the same time, I think it's important to pay attention to these different things that make up who you are.
Thank you. We have a lot of folks who are interested in kind of your career path, your school path, and I'm going to combine a couple of questions into one here, but what is your number one advice for students in unprivileged neighborhoods that want to pursue an art career and also pursuing an MFA as a Black or brown person?
Yeah, I would say one of the things I hear all the time people talk about is like not to get yourself into student debt, and I kind of agree with that, but at the same time, I feel like that has hindered so many people from even approaching a career in the visual arts. First of all, I think education institutions need to be more accountable for offering scholarships to more people of color. I think that's like critical, but at the same time, if you wait for that to happen, it might not happen in your lifetime. So I would say against all odds, always invest in yourself. However you need to get yourself to the next step, whether it's undergraduate or graduate, investing in your education, investing in yourself as an artist in whatever format you choose is your best investment. There's so many instances where I could think of where people of color are stifled from continuing their work. So many times I see people in school go and they want to make portraits, right? Or they want to do figurative work, and someone tells them immediately, you shouldn't do that anymore. You have to do something completely else. And what happens is when you take those critiques, when you take them personally, you wind up adjusting all of your art to be able to make those people happy. And guess what? Your work winds up just being like everybody else's work because you changed to suit their needs. I would base my work off of your lived experience. It can be abstract. It doesn't have to be literal if you don't want it to be. But I think it's important to say as true to yourself as you can.
I hope everyone's writing this down because this is amazing. It's also being recorded for those of you who aren't writing it down, so you can revisit it later. Can you tell us about your first experience with clay, and why did you focus on clay as a medium?
Yeah, my first experience was I met my wife in my first pottery class, so I got a lot of great things from that class. It was like $350 a class, so I got my money's worth at Seminole Community College. But I took an art class because this is as real as it gets. It's embarrassing, but it's as real as it gets. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to meet people my age. I was afraid of the writing part because I had never had to write a paper where you cite sources or any of those things. Like my first day of high school, my teacher handed us a textbook, our main homeroom teacher, and said, write down word for word what's in here, so if anybody looks in this classroom, it looks like you're doing something. Other than that, I don't care what you do, right? That's a real school. That's a school that exists today, okay? So I come from that. So going to school, I was like, man, I don't know if I want to, I want to be in college, but I want to, something to, so I decided to take an art class, and the teacher was a potter, and he asked me to try the pottery wheel. And the first time that I touched it, one of the things that I noticed is that it felt like work, it felt like labor, which felt really natural to me. I worked at a factory since I was 13, wrapping Christmas wreaths, which, was kind of like my job after school. So that experience was really incredible for me, but then it was the response from the people around me, all the other artists, where they just believed in me from the beginning. People were always so encouraging and saying, that's really nice, Rob. And it's like, believe it or not, at the age of 25, like I can count on one hand how many times somebody told me something I did was good, and so that really was just like, I want more of that. It was like a drug. I needed to continue to get that support, and then I started to make things that I really liked. And at first, I didn't make this work that references and has connections with race. But that work became really necessary because of the fact that everywhere that I went didn't allow me to be a production potter. I was trying to do that, and one of the stories that I tell, if we can say a turning point, was one time I did a craft fair in Pittsburgh, and it cost me $200. It was 3 days, and I made $60 after 3 days. I was selling my teapots for $25 and my cups for $25 or for $10 at the time, and we lost that money on the way home, it was a really terrible experience. And this was when I was graduating from graduate school, and thinking about having to go out into the world where you can make $60 after 3 days of being an artist and trying to peddle your work was a big realization. And then not too long after, I started working with a gallery, and those same teapots in the right place, in front of the right people at the right time, were then worth thousands of dollars, and were being sold like as fast as I could make them. And the reality is it's about knowing your worth as an artist. People are not going to respect you if you're not respecting your own artwork and pushing it out there. And the other part of it was like the fact that I was trying to sell work to a community who was struggling in other ways. If you're worried about food, you're not worried about the dish you're eating it out of, right? And so how do I still engage with that community without selling to them? And so that's the reason why I do what I do with representation.
Thank you. Yes, great answer. Can you talk about the relationship between the shape of your pieces and the portraits on them? When you work on a piece, do you know from the start the portrait that it will bear?
No, because not all of my pieces have portraits on them. I think that's probably what I'm most known for, but I try to be really purposeful with those things because, these are other people's images and legacies, and they're not mine. But one of the things that I'm really trying to convey when I do these things is I really want them to be purposeful. I'm thinking about how archival this material is. But a lot of times when I'm throwing, like I mentioned earlier before with my process, I'm really thinking to myself, today I'm going to throw 10 teapots. And then I have teapots sitting in my studio, and I think to myself, this one really needs this pattern, this one really needs this. And then when I look at the teapot, I say to myself, this reminds me a lot of Alma Thomas's work. And then that's the portrait that I would put on it. That's sort of how it works.
So straightforward. We have time for one more question, and I'm going to ask one about the Renwick, because that's our gallery, so I'm just going to take that prerogative. It was wonderful to see your work in person at SAAM's Renwick Gallery. Can you talk a little bit more about the work and it being part of the This Present Moment exhibition?
Yeah, so there's two pieces. One of them is actually one of the few pieces from Italy, the piece with Frederick Douglass on it. I was really inspired by Etruscan pottery and Italian pottery when I was over there, and I actually painted it over there. And so, and I was thinking about if I had to work in DC, what I would want to represent me and who I would want to be represented on it. The figures that I chose are very specific for that reason, like the Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac. You know, I wanted them to be next to a vase of Frederick Douglass and Marianne Douglass, because, you know, I wanted to show how different people contribute, because I think so many times we think that we have to be these exceptional people to contribute to society, and we all have different gifts and talents. And all those different gifts and talents, I want to be acknowledged. And so I thought of this real range of people who have contributed significantly, but at the same time work so differently and are about different things, and also grew up very differently, right? Like, one of the things that I think is lost so often when we talk about communities of color is not all people of color grow up in the same place. Some people grow up rural, some people grow up in the country, some people grow up in the city. And growing up very specifically, being a person of color and growing up in poverty is a very specific thing, because you face very specific challenges. And so that's why I relate to people like the story of, you know, Christopher Wallace and Tupac Shakur, is because I relate so much to their story, and the ending result of their lives being taken from them is something that I'm also very familiar with. And so to be able to communicate that to an audience, where what's really interesting is you have a decorative arts establishment, not that that's all that they show there, but, you know, somebody might come in and recognize the form as an Etruscan form. Somebody might recognize this teapot as a European teapot, but they have no clue who Biggie Smalls is, right? And I was once working with a gallery, and I shit you not, they had no idea who Harriet Tubman was. And, you know, the point is you put this piece in the museum, and I was recently in an exhibition at the Hermitage Museum where my work is on, and I heard that this guy was upstairs explaining to people what my work was, and I went to go meet the guy, and it was like somebody was inside my brain describing what I did and how I painted it to everybody else in the room, because he understood it in such a deep way, you know. And that person was becoming the educator. That person who grew up in the ghetto was now becoming the person that other people were going to for information to understand art. It wasn't this, you know, just the person who went to and got their PhD teaching everybody else. It was this reciprocity that happens when my work is in certain communities that I think is really important. And I think the Renwick is a really great place for that to exist. And just today when I was walking, it's really meta as an artist to see other people looking at your artwork, you know, and then, you know, also to hear conversations that are happening, you know, and to see people stop, it's really an incredible experience. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
There's a reception, right? There's a reception. Do we remind her?
Yes, there is a reception. So we invite you to go back upstairs to the Kogod courtyard and join us for a reception.
Yep.
So thank you, Roberto. Thank you all for
everybody
joining
for
us.
coming.
So amazing. Thank you for all of it.
Yes.